Today is saying one of the 30 Requiem Masses for Father Boulduc, Father Hector Boulduc. Father Boulduc was a priest in America who was one of the first priests ordained by Archbishop Lefebvre. He was ordained in 1975, and he died on September the 9th at the age of 74. So he was a little bit older when he was into the seminary. And Father Boulduc, some of you may have heard of Elvis Presley. Father Boulduc was a close friend of Elvis Presley, and Elvis and Father Boulduc were in the army together, and Elvis had many hard times with his father. He had many emotional difficulties with his father, and Father Boulduc used to help him to deal with his difficulties. And so out of gratitude to Father Boulduc, Elvis actually in 1978, the year that he died, he was going to do a concert for the support of the Society of St. Pius X. And the funds of the concert were going to be for the support of the SSPX. And then he died 1 month before the concert. So it never had the fundraising concert. And Father Boulduc used to have many contacts and friends. And of course, he was a very close friend with Archbishop Marcel Lefebvre, especially in the early years, because in 1975, though he was a newly ordained priest, he was an older man who had many experiences in life and had done many things. And so Archbishop Lefebvre used to speak very much with him, because of most of the priests in the society were all in their 20s. Most of us remember in our 20s, and Father Boulduc was already older. He was already in his 40s. And so he used to speak very much to Father Boulduc, asking advice on how to deal with things in America and so on. And Father Boulduc he was not the first priest in the United States. Father Post and other priests were the first ones who came in 1971, 1972. But in 75, when he came and he became the superior of the Southwest District. The United States was divided into two parts. And he purchased and built our largest and most successful parishes in America. St. Mary's, Kansas. Father Boulduc was the one who bought that place, who set it up. And the original number in the parish was 1 faithful. There was 1 faithful in the parish. A campus that was about the size of Maasin, and 1 faithful. And so then now there are about between 4,000 and 5,000 faithful. We have close to 1,000 children in our schools, and it is our largest active parish in America, and one of our largest parishes in the world, St. Mary's, Kansas. And many other parishes also he built up. Each place going around, setting up many small chapels, and bringing many people back to the faith and dealing with many, many priests. Finally, in 1985, he was, through a misunderstanding with Father Schmidberger, he was expelled from the Society of St. Pius X, and then he operated independently until he died a few weeks ago. And on the day of his death, September the 9th, at the age of 74, filled with cancer. He had lung cancer, so it was very difficult for him to breathe. And he had cancer throughout his whole body. He said 3 masses on the Sunday that he died. He was not able to walk to the church because of the breathing problem. So they put him in the car and they drive him to the church, which is about 100 meters from the rectory. And then he gets out, goes in the sacristy, says he has confessions, first Mass, confessions, second Mass. In the car, 3-hour drive, confessions, third Mass, and then he died in the night, between Sunday night and Monday morning. So he died with his boots on. And now we're saying one of the 30 Requiem Masses for him. He was one of the great warriors of Catholic tradition. And back in May 27th, Father Giselle and myself, we preached our first famous sermons, which is why that, not our first sermons, but the ones that got sent all over the world, against the modernism within the Society of St. Pius X. The fact that now we are beginning to say that the council is not so bad. The Vatican II, which is referred to by Our Lady of Fatima as the evil council, she referred to it as the evil council But now Bishop Fillet wants to refer to it as the not-so-bad council. The modernists want to refer to it as the greatest gift of the 20th century. So you have one side, Our Lady and Archbishop Lefebvre, calling it the evil council, which brought millions of souls to hell. On the other side, you have Pope Benedict XVI, and Pope Benedict XVI said that this council was the greatest gift that God gave to the 20th century, which is true if you are a servant of the devil, but it is not true if you are a servant of God. Millions and millions of souls have gone to hell, and Benedict XVI is deceived. He believes that that council was still something that did great good, even though in his own lifetime he has witnessed millions and millions of Catholics and hundreds of thousands of priests and religious leave the priesthood, leave the religious life, leave the Catholic Church, and ultimately go to hell. He has witnessed it with his own eyes. And yet Pope Benedict XVI still says it was the greatest gift of the Holy Ghost to the 20th century. And they're going to celebrate the 50th anniversary of the opening of that demonic council on October the 11th, 2012. And so on the one side, Our Lady said it was an evil council. Archbishop Marcel Lefebvre, who was a great servant of Our Lady, who founded our society. Our popular name is the Society of St. Pius X. But the actual title of the society to which we belong are the Apostles of Jesus and Mary. I am an apostle of Jesus and Mary. And the Apostles of Jesus and Mary want nothing to do with this modernist and wicked council. 50 years now, it has been destroying the Catholic Church, and not only the Catholics, but everybody has been destroyed by this council. The Protestants have gone down. The atheists are more stupid. The pagans have gone down. All of the world has gone down. Look at the dress and the behavior of the entire world. When the Catholic Church falls, the entire world falls. Everyone was affected by Vatican II. May of 27th, Father Chazelle and I preached our sermons against the neo-modernism within the society, saying, Bishop Fillet telling us the council was not that bad. That many of the things that we would have condemned in the council as errors and heresies in the past were not in fact errors and heresies, but were misunderstandings. But Archbishop Marcel Lefebvre said, he said that in a May 11th interview to the Catholic News Service in America. But Our Lady said it was an evil council, and Archbishop Lefebvre said, I accuse the council. He wrote a book called I Accuse the Council. It's no longer in print in English, disappearing also in French. And so you can actually go to eBay and you will find on sale right now one of the books of Archbishop Lefebvre, I Accuse the Council, on sale for about 75,000 pesos for one book. It's on eBay now. You can buy for 75,000 pesos because it's going out of the print. When it was originally sold in our bookstores, it was for sale for 200 pesos, 250. Now the rates have gone up because it is now a rare and endangered book. Like a rare and endangered species, it's now a rare and endangered book within tradition. Now what happened that over the course of the last 40 years of the Society of St. Pius X, the main message of our founder has become a rare and endangered teaching. How did that happen? Over the last 40 years, somehow we have begun to have some kind of corruption. And this is normal. This is normal. Many other religious orders, after about 40 years after they were founded, began to corrupt. Because in the beginning we become very successful. After you become very successful, the normal thing is you become very proud. After you become very proud, then comes the great fall. And this has happened so many times in history. So many times. One of our priests was telling Father Chazelle a month and a half ago, and another priest told me the same thing, and another priest told me the same thing. The SSPX cannot fall. The SSPX cannot collapse because it is the special instrument of Mary to preserve the Catholic faith. But we are more necessary, they seem to say, that we are more necessary than the Catholic Church. You can be saved without the SSPX. As one 85-year-old priest told me a year and a half ago, an old Irish priest, he said, the Society of St. Pius X is not the Holy Roman Catholic Church. I was ordained a priest before your society was born. And I wasn't made a priest of the Society of St. Pius X back 55 years ago when I was ordained a priest. I was made a priest of the Holy Roman Catholic Church. And now you're trying to treat me as if you are the Holy Roman Catholic Church. This priest was thrown out of one of our parishes and thrown out of one of our rectories, 85 years old. He was thrown out. So he was not very happy. But the fact is, the SSPX great glory, the glory of Archbishop Marcel Lefebvre, and the glory of the Apostles of Jesus and Mary, which is our order, which is called the Society of St. Pius X, our glory is the defense of the Holy Roman Catholic faith in an age in which the Church and its faith is attacked and despised. We preach when we walk the streets with our cassocks, whereas other priests do not. We preach when we talk from the pulpit about the teachings of our Holy Church and the condemnation of the errors. Father Boulduc, who just died and who now we're saying the Masses for, Father Boulduc contacted me back at the end of May and early June. Because remember, I always return to America in June because of the ordinations to the priesthood. This is the month that I return every year to the United States. And this so happens that Pentecost was just before my return. And Father Boulduc knew I was returning, and so he called me and contacted me. He said, please contact me. And so I contacted him. I then went and visited him in early June. And Father Boulduc, then dying, still saying his 3 Masses, making his sick calls, he said, you continue to speak out. If they ask you to be silent, cry louder. Cry to the moon. But do not be silent. We must speak the truth. We must follow the spirit of Archbishop Lefebvre. And he was a close friend of the Archbishop throughout the 70s. He knew him very well. And he always followed his spirit until he died. Saying at chapel, many Masses, many souls that he has helped over the years. And he was dying, at least 600-700 faithful, maybe 1,000 faithful were underneath that 74-year-old priest, besides all the others that he had sent off to seminaries and monasteries and religious life over the last 40 years of the society. And all the work. Father Boulduc says, don't ever fall for the Sedevacantism. Never fall for the Sedevacantists. I've always been an enemy of them. Don't fall for the new Mass. Don't fall for the modernism. I've always been an enemy of them. An enemy of the modern ways. And Archbishop Lefebvre was also a great enemy of the modern ways. And now the Society's new leadership is in danger of falling into the hands of the enemy. They're playing with the devil. Playing with fire. When you play with fire, there is a great danger that you might get burnt. Especially if you live in a Japanese paper house. You play with fire in a paper house, it's more dangerous than if you play with fire in a concrete house. And so it is very dangerous to play with fire. We are going and trying to put ourselves in the hands of modernist Rome, and this is going to cause grave harm to souls, because then we will be dependent upon the whims and the mercy of those whom we know do not want the Holy Roman Catholic faith pure and undefiled, who do not want to condemn the errors and the heresies that are prevalent today. And not only that, but these modernist bishops, our modernist Pope, and the modernist cardinals and the modernist leaders of the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith and the modernist leaders of the Ecclesia Dei Commission, who would be the ones in charge of us, these modernist leaders want to promote a neo-modernism. Remember that what the Pope wants, he wants beautiful incense, he wants Latin in the new Mass. It is like the man who feels very guilty because he beat his first wife, and he used to be a drunk, and he used to abuse his first wife. So he left her, and he is now living in adultery with his second wife. But this time he's going to do it right. And so, in adultery, he's going to be nice to his second wife. He is not going to beat his second wife like he did the first wife. The only problem is he's just going to be living in sin. But other than that, he's going to be a really nice guy. You cannot be faithful to your second wife. You cannot be nice to your second wife. And I hate to break it to you, but you cannot cheat on your second wife. You can't cheat on your girlfriend, and you can't cheat on your second wife. You can only cheat on your wife, your real wife. Now Pope Benedict XVI wants to be nicer to the second wife. And the second wife is the Vatican Council II wife, and she's very young. She's a lot younger. You know how a lot of times when women get older, they get worried because the husband is looking at younger women. He's looking at younger girls. And the husband gets worried. The wife gets worried. She tries to lift her wrinkles. She tries to put more makeup on. But he's still looking at the younger girls. And now Pope Benedict XVI is looking at the younger girl. He is looking at the younger girl who's only just turned 50, whereas the old woman is 1,999 years old. Yeah. That's an old girl. So, we don't want to be faithful to the old girl. We're going to be faithful to the new one. We're going to make the new one nicer because the new one's going to have a little bit of Latin. The new one's going to have a little bit of incense. The new one's going to have really holy priests. But we cannot be faithful to God when we're following the second wife. You see, it doesn't matter how nice we are to the second wife, how much incense we burn to the second wife, how many Latin prayers we say to the second wife. Like a man I met in the airport today, "Father, I'm a little bit happy," or yesterday, because they changed the prayers from "and with thy spirit," also with you, to "and with thy spirit." That's more like the old days. It's like putting paint on a rotten post that is filled with white ants. You find that your house is falling down and the white ants have eaten away, the termites have eaten away the bottom of the house. So what do? You paint it. You paint it so that no one can see the white ants. Will this save your house? No. You're wasting your paint. And so nowadays, we are finding Bishop Villay is being deceived by a diabolical disorientation. He may have a very good heart, and he wants to convert Rome. He wants to bring them back. But he's being deceived by the white paint. He's seeing that the wall used to be dirty, and now they've repainted the wall. And we are saying, forget about the paint. Underneath is white ants, little demonic termites, little devils that have eaten away the insides of the church. Don't look at the white paint. Don't be deceived by the new paint job inside of Rome. Now priests say the Latin Mass on the side altars. Remember that Arius said the traditional Mass. Arius never said a new Mass. Arius said the traditional Mass. Arius was a heretic who did not believe that Jesus was God. But he said the traditional Mass. And he wore traditional vestments. And Martin Luther said the traditional Mass. It took him a while to begin to change and develop a new Mass. But while he was beginning his great heresy, while he was spitting on the church, while he was nailing his 97 theses to the wall, he was teaching a new doctrine. He was violating the Church of God. He was teaching heresy. He was rejecting Rome. and he was still celebrating the true Mass. So likewise, you will find that they're going to bring in more Latin Masses. You will have Latin Masses available, but there will be a Latin and true Mass with a new doctrine, which is like white paint on top of a post that is destroyed by termites, destroyed by the white ants. What are we going to do? Cut out the post and replace it with good wood. You don't inject poisons. You cut out the post and replace it with good wood. That is, remove the council. Remove that whole wicked Vatican II council and throw it back into hell where it came from and where it belongs. The whole thing. If someone gives you a cake, 95% good, and only 5% of the cake has cyanide in it. Only 5%. So do you go to the cake? I think this part is good. That part, oh, bad. Bad judgment. You take that and you throw it away. You throw it away. And so Bishop Fillet, back in 2001 or back in 1999, said, we accept 95% of the council. This was the beginning of the slide. We accept 95% of the council. Only 5% is bad. And we have forgotten that doctrine is a living thing. If you take a bullet and you put it through 5% of my head, 100% of my body is dead. If you take a hole and you put it through 5% of the Titanic, 100% of the Titanic sinks. Because things that are in water and things that are alive require 100% integrity or they die. And our church and our doctrine and our faith is 100% alive and is like a balloon. If you take a little bitty pin and you put one small hole, you have no more balloon. This is the way our church is. And we have always taught that. As the church always taught, whoever denies one of the smallest doctrines of the church denies the whole thing. If you say you don't believe Jesus is God, you don't believe anything. If you say you don't believe the Catholic Church is the true church, you don't believe anything. If you say that the Pope is not the Pope, you don't believe anything. We either accept the whole of the teaching or none. You are either with me or you are against me. So says Jesus Christ. There is no middle ground or even 95% ground. It's either 100% or zero. These are the options that are given to us by our Lord Jesus Christ. We accept 100% of His teaching or zero. We cannot say 95% okay, only 5% bad. And so all we have to do is to repair the 5%. Father Boulduc told me, never compromise. He spoke to me again a few weeks, only a week or so, or a couple weeks before he died, repeating the same words. Stand strong, say your prayers, never compromise. And so, we must follow our elders. Like Father St. Bernard said, I am a small man, but I stand above the trees. Why? Because I stand on the shoulders of giants. I stand on the shoulders of Augustine. I stand on the shoulders of Gregory the Great. I stand on the shoulders of the fathers of the church. I am a small man. But whoever stands on the shoulders of the saints, like Augustine, the greatest of the fathers of the church, or Gregory the Great, Or St. Thomas Aquinas, the greatest of all the teachers that we have had down the last 2,000 years, who stands on these shoulders, stands on the shoulders of giants and towers above the trees. If we try to stand on our own 2 feet, we will be crushed by the tanks of the enemy. Don't stand on your own 2 feet. Stand on the shoulders of giants. And we must stand on the shoulders. Like Father Tim Pfeiffer, my brother, was preaching a few months ago. You read the book of Tobias. And in the book of Tobias, who is the great hero? His name is Tobias. Who is the beneficiary of his heroism? His name is also Tobias, but there are 2 different Tobiases. One is Tobias the father, and he is one of the greatest saints of the Old Testament. Tobias the father. And Tobias the father, when he was a young man, and all the Jews were rejecting God, and then they were taken into captivity away from Israel, he refused to reject God. And he went to the temple to pray. And he followed the law of God. And it says, though he was the youngest man of the tribe of Naphtali, he was the wisest in the things of God. Then he had a son whom he called by his own name. And the fathers tell us, whenever a priest has a son, he calls him by his own name. Father. When a bishop makes a son, he calls him by his own name. And Tobias, when he had a son, he called him by his own name. Tobias. And he told him to be like unto himself. When Tobias was a little bitty baby, his father Tobias said, you will fear God. You will be generous to the poor. You will follow the commandments. Fear God rather than men. Do not fear men, fear God. Follow the laws of God. And he taught him to follow the laws of God. And Tobias was eating at table. And there was a Jew murdered in the streets, lying dead. And it was against the law to bury the Jews. Someone came and said, Tobias, there is a Jew dead in the streets. And he rose. The wife had just put the food at the table. He had not yet eaten. He was getting ready to take his first bite. And when he heard that there was a Jew dead, he left the food at the table. And he went and he picked up the dead body, which was against the law and punishable by death. And he brought the dead body into his house and he laid it into the room. And then he ate his meal. And at midnight, he went and buried the body. And this he did to all the dead Jews. And one day he was tired from burying. He was exhausted from his work, because during the day he would carry in the bodies and hide them, and at night he would work. And he fell asleep under a wall, and a bird dropped dung into his eyes, and he became blind. And he came home, and his wife said, this is what happens to you for following your God. Now notice those words. She is a Jew. She follows the same God. But somehow it became your God. Notice how when you're mad at your son, when he's good, he's my son. When he's bad, he's your son. Very often when the mother says, your son did this. So all of a sudden, when the son is bad, he's not my son anymore, he's your son. And so likewise, she was mad at God. Your God. And this is what you get from following your God. But Tobias wept, and he said, let me rather die than to live in this grief, but I will never abandon my God. And God sent the angel Raphael. And at the very end of the book of Tobias, after the great miracle of the saving of Tobias' son and so on, the angel Raphael says, I am one of the 7 who stands in the presence of God. Now remember, there are billions and billions and billions of angels, without number. But God sent one of the 7 holiest angels to Tobias. Why? And he explains the reason. Because when you were sitting at the table and you had not yet taken your food, and they came and told you there was a Jew dead in the streets, you rose up without eating, you rose up fasting, and you went and buried the body, and God saw in heaven, and He sent me. Imagine that. One of the 7 holiest angels in heaven is sent by God Himself to the earth because of a small fasting. Because of the fasting for the sake of charity towards the neighbor. Because of the willingness to suffer for the love of neighbor and the love of God. What will God send to us if we do a small fasting? What will God send to us if we take some small sacrifice in order to be pleasing to Him? Father Boulduc sacrificed his whole life for the good of souls. He was not perfect. We must pray for his soul. He too was a sinner. But he was a good priest of God. And compared to us peons of the SSPX today, he was a giant. And I will stand on his shoulders. And will preach what he preached. And also, I stand on the shoulders of my old pastor, Father Hannafin. How do you have a priest before you today? We do not come out of nothing. We don't pop out of the midair. We aren't dropped by storks into the middle of the city. We come from priests. A priest comes from priests. It was the old Irish pastor who made it possible for me to become a priest. It was an old French archbishop who made it possible for me to be a priest. It was another old priest being faithful here, another old priest being faithful there, who made it possible for me to be a priest. These priests who have stood faithful, many of them are now dead throughout the world. But these priests that have stood faithful for the Catholic tradition, teaching the Catholic faith of the Holy Roman Catholic Church, passing it on to their children, and their children's children, to the 3rd and 4th generation in the priesthood. They have preserved our faith. I owe my priesthood to another priest whom you do not know and whom I never met. His name is Father Gettelfinger, an old priest in Kentucky. And Father Gettelfinger was an old priest. There was a young priest who was very scrupulous. A young priest who was afraid of giving out the sacraments because he thought it would be a sin if he gave the absolution. He would take him a long time to say the Mass. And that young priest's name was Father Hannafin. The young priest was scrupulous. The young priest was afraid. The young priest was worried in his priesthood. And they said, go to the old Father Gettelfinger out in Lebanon, Kentucky. And he went. And Father Gettelfinger told Father Hannafin, Sacramenta propter homines. That's what he told them. The sacraments are for men. The sacraments are for the living. And if you want to be a good priest, don't be scrupulous about anointing someone too early. Don't be scrupulous about the absolution. Don't be scrupulous about all the various masses. But you give the sacraments to the living. Young Father Frank, the sacraments are for the living. The sacraments are for the living. Live your priesthood to give the sacraments to souls. And he lost his scrupulosity. And when Vatican II came, and they came out with a new Mass, and they came out with a new focus, and they forgot about the sacraments, and they forgot about the love of the liturgy, young Father Francis, who now was 25 years a priest, Father Gettelfinger told me the sacraments are for souls, and you're trying to take the sacraments away from souls. And this new Mass is not a sacrament, it's a sacrilege. And so he remembered Father Gettelfinger. He remained faithful to Father Gettelfinger, whose shoulders he stood upon and whom I never met. He died before I was born. And then when I was a little boy, he used to say, Joey, the sacraments are for the living. The sacraments are for souls. And the priest is to go out and bring the sacraments to souls. That's what a priest is to do. And then my brother and I entered the seminary and became priests. We are small. but we stand upon the shoulders of giants. And not only the giants of the great saints, but the giants of those priests who have handed down the holy priesthood and handed down how to be a priest and handed down the faith down these last 2,000 years. Many of them you never know. The ones that built the cathedral. There's a church, a priest built the cathedral in Denver, Colorado. It's a very interesting cathedral. I always consider him as one of my spiritual fathers because of what happened to him. He wanted to build a massive cathedral, and he didn't care that it was going to cost $1 million back 100 years ago. But the bishop cared. So he designed this big Gothic cathedral, and he bought all the stained glass windows from Germany, and they all came in, and he started building the cathedral, and then the bishop came and looked at the budget. He said, "Ah! We don't have any kind of money like that, you idiot." And so he shortened the cathedral. He took out a whole section of the cathedral, and the cathedral is shorter. And if you go to the Denver Cathedral, you'll notice that it's a little stubby. It's not the full length like it should be. And also there's windows that are in the transepts that should be in the main nave. That's because he bought the windows, and he was building the church, and he was going to make it bigger than the town. But then the bishop got mad. The bishop fired him because it was too much money. And he didn't fire him. He made him, "You're going to build it smaller." So they shrunk the cathedral. Now the priest has died and forgotten. But the heart continues. Another priest, also in Colorado. He was a tough guy. He would shoot people if they made him too mad. He was a little bit unusual. But he converted many souls. Another priest 100 years ago who beat up my grandfather. He beat him to a pulp. He was a big giant of a priest. And my grandfather, my great-great-grandfather 100 years ago, he was a giant also, but he was a drunk. And he used to beat my great-great-grandmother. And he didn't go to church. And old Father Kunz found out about it. So he went to the bar where my great-grandfather used to drink. And he was a big man like my great-grandfather. Great-great-grandfather. He said, "I can outdrink you because you're a loser." And he outdrank him. He says, "Now you're going to go to Mass tomorrow morning." He says, "No, I'm not, Father. You're going to go to Mass or I'm going to kill you." And he said, "All right, Father, if you didn't have that collar, we'd take this outside." So he took off his collar and said, "Let's go outside right now." And they went outside in the streets in Louisville, Kentucky. And the priest beat my great-grandfather half to death. He punched him, he beat him, he kicked him, he threw him on the ground, and he said, "Tomorrow morning, you're at Mass, or I'm coming back." And bruised and beaten, he came to Mass. You no longer beat your wife. You live a Catholic life, and you're not a drunk anymore. And he raised his family Catholic, and he converted. It was an unorthodox conversion system. And if Father Kunz did not do that 100 years ago, I would not be a priest. And you can go back for 1,000 years, and you will find priests that have stood upon the gospel, and we will not know them all until the day of judgment. We are not alone. 2 priests, one crazy Frenchman outside, another crazy Kentuckian inside. Both of us nuts. But why do we have the priesthood? Because of other men who have been faithful priests down the last 2,000 years. And it is our duty to follow the example of our fathers. Like little Tobias had the duty to follow the example of his father, the great Tobias. He had to have confidence in the great father. Remember when little Tobias was told to marry Sarah, whose last 7 husbands didn't do very well. Remember, Sarah had 7 husbands, and they all died on the night of the wedding. And husband number 8 was Tobias. And Tobias said to Raphael, "Are you sure you want me to go through with this? Because the last 7 didn't do very well." They all died. And they were so confident that Tobias was going to die, they built a coffin. That's what they did for the wedding. You make a cake, they made a coffin. And they made a coffin. And then Tobias was married, and then Raphael said to Tobias, the reason why those 7 husbands died is because Sarah is sacred. And because Sarah is meant to be loved by a man of God. And you will not be with her in sexual pleasure. You will be abstaining from her for the first 3 nights of the marriage, and you will denote these 3 nights to God. And you will consecrate these 3 nights to God into perpetual prayer. And then God will bless you. And when you do become united with Sarah after the 3rd night, you will think of children and not of pleasure. And Tobias followed the law of Raphael, and he had a holy wife. And they brought the coffin out. He wasn't dead the first night. They brought the coffin out. He wasn't dead the second night. They brought the coffin out again. He wasn't dead the 3rd night. Then they thought, well, maybe we can make a table out of this coffin. We must have confidence. Even if the world says you're going to die, if the angel Raphael says, have confidence, then we obey the angel. So likewise, we must stand upon the hearts, the shoulders of our fathers. Our fathers preached the truth in season and out of season, against all opposition, with all opposition against them, their superiors against them, the whole church against them, the whole weight of the world against them. But Father Hannafin stood up, and Father Boulduc stood up, and Archbishop Marcel Lefebvre, the greatest saint of the crisis of the church, stood up. So we likewise must be faithful sons, though we are weak, and stand with our little short bodies on top of their giant shoulders. And then we can be confident. No compromise with modernist Rome. Stand firm for Catholic tradition. Follow the example of the great fathers. Not only the great saints, but fathers like Father Boulduc, who we're saying Mass for today. And fathers like Father Hannafin, whom you do not know, but I was raised with. And Father Urban Snyder, another old Trappist priest I was raised with. And so many of these other priests who have stood for the faith in perilous times. And the great ones like Archbishop Marcel Lefebvre. And we stand upon their shoulders, and we have confidence. And if we are faithful to our fathers, then the Heavenly Father will preserve us. And if we are faithful to our fathers, the Heavenly Mother will preserve us. And then we need not fear as we go through this world. Even though we foolishly fear, we're not supposed to. We need not fear. And then God will protect us and preserve our faith from now until the ending of the world. We'll close it at that. God bless you all. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Ghost. Amen.